In September 2019, 5 nuns from the Convent of Sacred Heart in the small town of Millfield, Vermont, disappeared during their weekly charity work at the local homeless shelter. Sister Margaret, Sister Catherine, Sister Anne, Sister Rose, and Sister Beatrice simply never returned to the convent that Tuesday evening. Their van was found abandoned in the shelter parking lot, their personal belongings untouched, but the sisters had vanished without a trace. Despite extensive searches by police and volunteers, no sign of the 5 women was ever found. For 5 years, the case remained one of Vermont's most puzzling mysteries. Then, in October 2024, when renovation crews began modernizing the historic Millfield Cemetery's caretaker facilities, they discovered something hidden in the underground tunnel system beneath the oldest section of the graveyard. What they found would expose a conspiracy so shocking it had been buried beneath sacred ground for half a decade. Detective Sarah O'Brien had been trying to avoid the Sacred Heart case for 5 years, but not for professional reasons. It was personal in a way that made her question everything she believed about justice, faith, and the people who claimed to serve God. Sister Margaret had been Sarah's aunt, her father's younger sister, who had taken her vows at 19 and devoted her life to helping the poor and forgotten. Sarah remembered visiting Aunt Maggie at the convent as a child, marveling at the peace and purpose that seemed to radiate from her. The other nuns would gather around 8-year-old Sarah during those visits, delighting in her endless questions about their lives and their faith. "Why do you wear those clothes every day?" Sarah had asked once, tugging at Sister Margaret's habit. "Because it reminds us who we serve," her aunt had replied with a smile. "Not ourselves, but something much bigger and more important." When other kids complained about boring relatives, Sarah bragged about having a nun in the family. She'd tell her classmates about the convent garden where the sisters grew vegetables for the poor, about their early morning prayers that started before sunrise, about how Aunt Maggie could make even the most stubborn child behave with just a gentle word and a kind look. When Sister Margaret and her 4 companions disappeared in September 2019, Sarah had been a detective with the Vermont State Police for 8 years. She'd begged to be assigned to the case, but her captain had refused due to her personal connection. She'd watched from the sidelines as other detectives interviewed witnesses, searched the surrounding forests, and gradually ran out of leads. The investigation had been thorough, but ultimately fruitless. The 5 nuns had simply vanished as if they'd never existed. Their van had been found unlocked in the shelter parking lot, keys still in the ignition, but there were no signs of struggle, no witnesses to what had happened, no clues about where they might have gone. Sarah had spent countless sleepless nights driving the roads between the shelter and the convent, looking for any sign of what might have happened to her aunt and her friends. She'd interviewed shelter residents, reviewed security footage from nearby businesses, and followed up on every possible lead, all on her own time and against department policy. 5 years later, Detective Sarah O'Brien was the senior investigator on the unit, and when the call came in about the discovery at Millfield Cemetery, she made sure she was the one who responded. After half a decade of watching others search for her aunt, Sarah was finally going to find out what happened to the Silent Sisters. The renovation foreman's call that Tuesday morning in October had been puzzling. "We found something in the old cemetery tunnels," Mike Torres had told her. "Personal belongings that look like they've been there for years. Religious items." Sarah drove to Millfield Cemetery with her heart pounding, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. The cemetery had been established in 1847, one of the oldest burial grounds in northern Vermont, and the nuns from Sacred Heart had volunteered there for decades. Sister Margaret had often brought Sarah there as a child, teaching her to read the old headstones and telling her stories about the families buried beneath them. "Every person here had a story," Sister Margaret used to say as they walked among the weathered monuments. "Our job is to remember them, to honor their lives, and to care for this place where their families come to grieve. The cemetery sprawled across 15 acres of gently rolling hills with sections dating back to different eras of Millfield's history. The oldest area contained elaborate Victorian monuments and family crypts, while newer sections featured more modest markers. Like many historic cemeteries, Millfield had been built with an underground tunnel system that connected various burial vaults and provided access for maintenance during Vermont's harsh winters when the ground was too frozen for traditional burials. Torres led her to an excavation site behind the caretaker's cottage where workers had been digging the foundation for a new climate-controlled storage facility. The project was part of a modernization effort funded by a historical preservation grant designed to better protect the cemetery's extensive records and provide improved facilities for maintenance staff. We were digging down about 4 feet when we hit one of the old tunnel entrances, Torres explained, pointing to a dark opening that had been revealed by the excavation equipment. According to the original cemetery plans from 1847, there's a whole network of underground passages down there. Most of them have been sealed for decades, but this one was different. Sarah knelt beside the opening, peering into the darkness. The tunnel entrance was about 3 feet wide and tall enough for an adult to crawl through comfortably. The walls were lined with old brick that had been laid with the precise craftsmanship of 19th century stonemasons. Different how? She asked. Someone had been using it recently, Torres said. The debris that should have accumulated over the years had been cleared away. And we found footprints in the dust, multiple sets, all wearing the same type of soft-soled shoes. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and took a flashlight from Torres. As she crawled into the tunnel, she could smell the musty air that had been trapped underground for decades, mixed with something else, a faint scent that reminded her of the convent laundry, the particular soap the sisters used to wash their habits. The tunnel led deeper into the hillside, connecting to other passages that branched off in various directions. The brick walls showed signs of recent passage, disturbed cobwebs, areas where someone had brushed against the walls, footprints in the accumulated dust that led deeper into the underground network. About 50 feet from the entrance, Sarah's flashlight illuminated a small alcove that had been carved out of the tunnel wall. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw what was hidden there. 5 nuns' habits were carefully folded and stacked against one wall, along with personal belongings that Sarah recognized immediately. Prayer books with worn leather covers, rosary beads made from different materials, wood, silver, simple plastic, and small crosses that each sister had worn around her neck. At the bottom of the pile was her aunt's distinctive silver locket, the one that had belonged to their grandmother and contained a tiny photograph of the family farm in Ireland where the O'Brien sisters had been born. "Aunt Maggie," Sarah whispered, picking up the locket with trembling hands. She remembered Sister Margaret showing her the photograph inside when she was a child, telling her stories about their grandmother's courage in leaving everything behind to start a new life in America. But beside the personal effects was a canvas bag that had been carefully sealed with waterproof tape. Inside, Sarah found items that immediately transformed the discovery from a heartbreaking recovery of personal belongings into evidence of something far more sinister. The bag contained a collection of photographs, handwritten notes, and documents that revealed the sisters had been witnesses to something that had cost them their lives. The photos were amateur quality, clearly taken in secret from a distance, but they showed disturbing scenes that made Sarah's hands shake as she examined them. The images showed homeless individuals being loaded into unmarked vans outside the Millfield homeless shelter. The people in the photographs appeared unconscious or heavily sedated, their bodies limp as they were carried by men in civilian clothes who handled them with the casual efficiency of people who had done this many times before. A handwritten note in Sister Margaret's careful script was clipped to the photos. "We've seen this happening 4 times now. Always the same van, always the same men. These poor souls never come back to the shelter. We asked Dr. Harrison where they were being taken, but he keeps giving us different answers that don't add up. Sarah found more of her aunt's documentation in the bag, written on simple notebook paper in the straightforward language of someone recording what she had witnessed rather than conducting a formal investigation. The notes were dated over a period of 6 weeks, from early August through mid-September 2019. August 15th. Tommy Rodriguez was taken today. He's been staying at the shelter for 2 months, really getting his life together. Been clean for 60 days, had a job interview lined up for next week. Dr. Harrison said he was being taken for specialized treatment for his addiction issues, but he wouldn't say where or for how long. Tommy looked scared and confused. He kept asking why he had to go when he was doing so well. August 18th. Maria Santos didn't come back from her treatment. Dr. Harrison said she decided to enter a long-term program, but Maria never mentioned wanting to leave. She was excited about her daughter's wedding next month. Why would she miss that? August 22nd. Saw the same van that took Tommy and Maria. This time they took elderly Mr. Chen and his friend Mrs. Kowalski. Both of them have been at the shelter for months, helped us serve meals every day. Dr. Harrison said they were going to a specialized facility for seniors with mental health issues, but neither of them showed signs of mental illness. They were some of our most reliable volunteers. Sarah could hear her aunt's voice in every word, the same gentle concern she'd shown for every person she'd ever encountered. Sister Margaret had never been suspicious by nature. She'd always looked for the best in people and trusted authority figures to do the right thing. The fact that she had started questioning Dr. Harrison's explanations meant that something had been very obviously wrong. September 2nd. Sister Catherine and I followed the van today. We told Dr. Harrison we were going to visit Maria Santos at whatever facility she was taken to, and he got very nervous. Said visitors weren't allowed, that it would interfere with the treatment process. When we insisted, he finally gave us an address, but when we drove there, it was just an empty lot. We kept driving and saw the van heading toward the old Johnson farm outside town. September 5th. Went back to the Johnson farm with Sister Anne. The old barn has been converted into something. Lots of cars there, official-looking vehicles with government plates. We didn't get too close, but we could see people in white coats going in and out. We heard sounds from inside that didn't sound like any medical treatment we'd ever heard. Sounded more like screaming. The notes became increasingly alarmed as the weeks progressed. Sarah could sense her aunt's growing horror as she realized that the people she was trying to help were being taken somewhere terrible, and that the man she had trusted to care for them was lying about what was happening. September 10th. Doctor. Harrison got angry when we asked again about visiting the people who had been taken for treatment, said we were interfering with important medical work and that we should stick to serving meals and leave the medical decisions to professionals. But we're not questioning medical decisions. We just want to know if our friends are okay. September 12th. Found out that doctor. Harrison isn't just working at our shelter. He's been visiting other shelters and facilities throughout the region, selecting people for his specialized treatment programs. Sister Rose called her cousin who works at a shelter in Burlington, and they've had similar disappearances. Always the same story, people taken for treatment who never come back. At the bottom of the bag was a manila envelope containing photocopied documents. The copies were poor quality, clearly made quickly and in secret, but Sarah could make out enough to understand what her aunt had discovered. Medical consent forms with signatures that looked shaky and uncertain, as if the people signing them had been heavily medicated or coerced. Transport authorizations for psychiatric evaluation and specialized addiction treatment that were signed by Dr. Harrison but lacked the proper institutional headers or official seals that legitimate medical documents would have. and at the bottom, a partial copy of what appeared to be a research protocol titled Project Sanctuary, Phase 3 Human Trials, Neurological Intervention Studies in Homeless Populations. A note from Sister Beatrice, who had worked as a nurse for 15 years before taking her vows, was clipped to the medical documents. These consent forms are fraudulent. I've processed thousands of medical authorizations, and these don't follow proper procedures. The signatures look like they were obtained from people who weren't capable of understanding what they were signing. This isn't legitimate medical treatment. It's something else entirely. The final item in the envelope was a small cassette tape labeled Doctor. Harrison, September 16th, in Sister Rose's neat handwriting. A note explained, I always carry my small recorder to tape our Bible study sessions for Sister Agnes, who can't always attend because of her arthritis. I forgot to turn it off when we met with Dr. Harrison about the missing people. This is what he said after he thought we had all left the building. Sarah immediately called for FBI assistance, recognizing that the evidence pointed to federal crimes involving medical fraud and potentially much worse. While waiting for agents to arrive, she found an old cassette player in the cemetery office and listened to the recording that Sister Rose had accidentally made. The tape was scratchy and the sound quality was poor, but Dr. Harrison's voice was clear enough to understand. He was talking to someone on the phone, apparently unaware that Sister Rose had returned to his office to retrieve a purse she had forgotten during their meeting. The nuns are becoming a serious problem, Doctor, Harrison was saying. His voice was tense, worried. They're asking too many questions about the subjects we've been selecting from the shelter. I've tried to deflect their concerns, told them it's confidential medical information, but they're not backing off. There was a pause while the person on the other end of the call responded. Then, Doctor, Harrison continued. No, I don't think they know the full scope of the program yet. They're just 5 naive women who think they're protecting homeless people. But they've started asking other shelters about similar disappearances, and they're talking about contacting state authorities if I don't give them better answers. Another pause, then his voice became more urgent. I understand the timeline pressure, but we can't afford to have this operation exposed now. We're in the middle of the most important phase of the research. The neurological modification protocols are showing unprecedented success rates. Sarah felt sick as she listened to Dr. Harrison discussing her aunt and her friends as if they were obstacles to be removed rather than human beings trying to help vulnerable people. Yes, I agree that containment is necessary, Dr. Harrison continued, but it has to look completely natural. 5 nuns disappearing simultaneously would trigger a massive investigation. It needs to appear like an accident or voluntary departure. The voice on the other end of the call spoke for several minutes, too quietly for the tape to pick up, but Dr. Harrison's responses made clear what was being planned. I can arrange for them to be at the shelter Tuesday evening. They always stay late on Tuesdays to prepare meals for Wednesday. The building will be mostly empty, and there are no security cameras in the kitchen area where they work. Another pause, then. Understood. Make it look like they left voluntarily to do missionary work somewhere remote. Their order has programs in South America and Africa. It would be believable that they might be sent there on short notice. By the time anyone starts asking serious questions, the trail will be completely cold. The recording ended there, but it was enough to confirm what Sarah had suspected. Her aunt and her companions had been murdered because they had accidentally witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, and their innocent questions had threatened to expose a conspiracy that someone was willing to kill to protect. When FBI agent Michael Torres arrived with his team, Sarah played him the tape and showed him all the evidence the sisters had collected. His expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed their simple but damning documentation. These women weren't trained investigators, Agent Torres said after examining everything. They were just trying to help the people at the shelter and happened to notice that their friends were disappearing. But what they stumbled onto was much bigger and more dangerous than they could have imagined. Using the address Sister Margaret had noted for the Johnson farm, FBI agents immediately organized a raid on the facility. What they found there confirmed the worst fears about what had been happening to the missing homeless individuals. The abandoned barn had been converted into a sophisticated medical laboratory equipped with surgical suites, monitoring equipment, and holding cells that were designed to contain human subjects for extended periods. The facility showed clear signs of recent use, with evidence that it had been hastily abandoned within the past few days. In Dr. Harrison's office at the facility, agents found detailed records documenting systematic medical experimentation on homeless individuals over a 3-year period. The files contained photographs, medical charts, and research data showing that over 80 people had been subjected to various forms of unauthorized neurological procedures. The research focused on testing experimental brain surgery techniques, untested psychiatric medications, and procedures designed to study how memory, personality, and behavior could be medically modified or controlled. The mortality rate among test subjects was over 75%, with most dying during or shortly after the experimental procedures. But the most damning evidence was found in a locked filing cabinet that contained correspondence between Dr. Harrison and his supervisors about the nun problem and the need for immediate containment to protect the research program. The FBI investigation revealed that Project Sanctuary was part of a classified medical research program that had been operating under the cover of treating homeless individuals with mental health and addiction issues. The program was funded through a complex network of grants from multiple federal agencies and private pharmaceutical companies. Agent Torres discovered that Dr. Harrison had been systematically targeting homeless populations throughout Vermont and New Hampshire, using a network of shelters and clinics to identify suitable test subjects. The victims were selected based on specific criteria. They had to be isolated from family, have histories of mental illness or addiction that would make their disappearances seem plausible, and be physically healthy enough to survive the experimental procedures. The investigation showed that the program had been designed to develop new methods of neurological control that could be used for military, intelligence, and law enforcement applications. The research focused on techniques for modifying memory, altering personality traits, and creating more compliant behavior through surgical and chemical intervention. Dr. Harrison's files revealed that the 5 nuns had been targeted for elimination, not because they posed a sophisticated investigative threat, but because their innocent questions about missing shelter residents had the potential to eventually lead to official inquiries that could expose the entire operation. The correspondence found in Dr. Harrison's files showed that the decision to murder the sisters had been made at the highest levels of the conspiracy. The plan had been to make their disappearance look like a voluntary departure for missionary work, with forged documents showing that they had been transferred to a remote location where they couldn't be contacted. The evidence revealed that Sister Margaret and her companions had been taken from the shelter on the evening of September 17, 2019, and transported to the Johnson Farm facility where they were held for several days before being killed. Their bodies had been disposed of using methods that ensured they would never be found, while their personal belongings were hidden in the cemetery tunnels to support the story that they had left voluntarily. The investigation ultimately identified 15 individuals who had been directly involved in the conspiracy, including Dr. Harrison, several other medical researchers, facility administrators, and government officials who had provided funding and oversight for the illegal program. Dr. James Harrison was arrested at his home in Burlington, where agents found additional evidence of his involvement in the murder of the 5 nuns and the illegal experimentation on homeless individuals. 7 other medical personnel were charged with conspiracy, murder, and violations of federal laws governing human experimentation. 4 government officials were arrested and charged with conspiracy and accessory to murder for their roles in authorizing and funding the illegal research program. 3 executives from pharmaceutical companies were charged with conspiracy to commit murder and funding illegal human experimentation. The case attracted national media attention and led to congressional investigations into government-sponsored medical research programs. The hearings resulted in significant reforms in oversight of experimental medical research and new protections for vulnerable populations who might be targeted for exploitation. Sarah O'Brien had finally solved the case that had haunted her for 5 years, learning that her aunt had died not as a heroic investigator, but as an innocent witness who had simply been trying to help vulnerable people and had accidentally discovered something terrible. But in solving the case, Sarah had also learned something else about her aunt that filled her with pride even in the midst of grief. Sister Margaret and her companions had known they were in danger, but they had chosen to continue asking questions and documenting what they had witnessed because they couldn't bear to stand by while innocent people were being hurt. The 5 nuns were finally laid to rest in Millfield Cemetery, in a section not far from the tunnel system where they had hidden their evidence. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the sisters' ministry, as well as family members of the homeless individuals who had been victims of Dr. Harrison's experimentation program. Sarah spoke at the funeral, reading from her aunt's notes about the importance of protecting vulnerable people who had no one else to speak for them. Aunt Maggie and her sisters weren't trained investigators or heroes from a movie, Sarah told the gathering. They were ordinary women who saw something wrong and couldn't look away. They died because they cared too much about other people to ignore their suffering. The cemetery where the sisters were buried became a place of pilgrimage for advocates working to protect homeless populations and other vulnerable groups from exploitation. A memorial was erected near the tunnel entrance where their evidence had been found, honoring not just the 5 nuns but all the victims of Project Sanctuary who had died in the name of illegal medical research. Sarah kept her aunt's silver locket on her desk at the police station, along with a photograph of the 5 sisters taken just days before their disappearance. The image showed them serving meals at the homeless shelter, smiling as they worked together to help people who had nowhere else to turn. The Silent Sisters had taught her that heroism didn't require special training, sophisticated equipment, or dramatic confrontations with evil. Sometimes it just required the willingness to pay attention to the suffering of others and the courage to ask questions when something didn't seem right, even when those questions put your own life at risk. In the end, the Sacred Heart case had revealed that her aunt's greatest strength hadn't been her faith, her compassion, or her dedication to helping others, though she had possessed all of those qualities in abundance. Her greatest strength had been her refusal to look away when people were being hurt, even when looking away would have been safer and easier. The conspiracy had been buried beneath sacred ground for 5 years, but love had proven stronger than fear, and the truth had finally overcome the forces that sought to silence it. Sister Margaret and her companions had won their final battle not through violence or confrontation, but through their simple determination to bear witness to injustice and preserve evidence that evil could not be allowed to hide forever.